Hello, my lovely listeners. I'm Dr. Mary Barson.
And I'm Dr. Lucy Burns. Welcome to this episode of Real Health and Weight Loss. Good morning, lovely listeners. It's Dr. Lucy here. I am without Dr. Mary, but I am with a fabulous guest today who I've been dying to talk to. And I'm sure you're going to love this interview. But I'm talking with the 2020 Australian of the Year, Dr. James Muecke. Welcome, James. How are you?
Good morning, Lucy. I'm really good, thanks. How are you?
Yes, very, very well. Thank you. Very well. Good. So I thought maybe, I know that lots of our listeners will know who you are, but maybe some don't. So maybe if you could introduce yourself and let us know who you are and what you're about, that would be awesome.
Sure. In fact, I don't think most people know who I am. I think COVID made that very successful. So I'm an eye surgeon based in Adelaide. I run a blindness prevention organisation called Sight for All, and I'm also 2020 Australian of the Year.
Wonderful, wonderful. So it's interesting, Australian of the Year, they get announced, and for a lot of people it becomes, a platform to be able to spread your message, which is wonderful. But how does one become Australian of the Year?
You have to be nominated. So it used to be a tap on the shoulder, but these days for some years it's been a nomination process. So initially you have to be nominated for your state or territory category. So 2 years ago, it's actually coming up to the 2021 state ceremony, awards ceremony in a week or two actually. So 2 years ago I was nominated for South Australian category of Australian of the Year, in the Australian of the Year category, and not expecting to win it, but was very fortunate to win it. And then you go through to the national ceremony, which is in the Australia Day weekend in Canberra, and you then competing within your category. So there's 4 categories: Australian of the Year, which was my category, Young Australian of the Year, Local Hero, and Senior Australian of the Year. So you then, within your category, are competing against the other 7 state or territory recipients. And so big ceremony in Canberra, a lot of excitement and hullabaloo. Once again, not expecting to win the award. Absolutely not expect. I didn't think they were going to give it to another doctor from Adelaide. And lo and behold, I did receive the award. So it was quite a shock and a wonderful surprise. And I felt, what a fantastic opportunity for Sight for All, which is really why I won the award. And so this was going to be the year, 2020 was going to be the year to put Sight for All on the map, because we're a little known organisation, really struggle with funding, but having enormous impact in the work we do. And yet, sadly, because of coming off the bushfires and the droughts and then going into the pandemic, the opportunity for fundraising was not there at all. In fact, we flatlined, if not dropped off, in terms of our fundraising. So it was disappointing for me, because I thought more than anything, this was the time for us.
The irony, isn't it? Sight for All in 2020.
Yes.
Just for a little bit of a pun.
Exactly.
My husband is a punster and we live for puns. So tell us a little bit about your organisation, Sight for All. Tell me a bit about it, and our listeners, they would love to hear about it.
Sure. So we're a not-for-profit organisation, what's called a social impact organisation, with a mission to create a world where everyone can see. So that is our mission, and we have projects now, or either past or active projects in 9 countries in Asia, a couple in Africa, and also in mainstream and Aboriginal communities here in Australia. And we're impacting on about 1 million people plus every single year in terms of the work that we do. So we have 4 key strategies. So collaborative research, sustainable education, supporting that education with appropriate equipment and infrastructure, and the 4th is raising awareness. So I can give you some really great examples of how that works, if you like.
Absolutely, that'd be great. We love examples.
Yeah, so probably the best story that I like to tell, I was involved in a childhood blindness study in Myanmar back in 2007. So Myanmar, certainly at the time, was one of the poorest nations in the world, obviously a country that's going through its own terrible time at the moment. But I led a childhood blindness study there where we visited 7 schools for the blind across the country. And what we found was really quite staggering. We found that nearly half of the kids had blindness that could have been prevented or treated. But more than that, it was the leading cause of blindness that had such a powerful impact on myself and the entire team, and that was measles. And now, you as a GP, you may be aware that measles could cause blindness. Most people wouldn't, but certainly I suspect no one or not many people have seen what measles can do to an eye. It's actually quite devastating, and generally it's on the back of poor nutrition. So if you're malnourished, measles can kill you, and if it doesn't kill you, it can certainly blind you. But it can blind you in a horribly painful, disfiguring and irreversibly blinding way. And so to be surrounded by children at schools who are blind across the length and breadth of this country was absolutely one of the most powerful experiences of my clinical life. And it had a number of effects. So that research was really important because it then allowed, once we published the study, I went back to Myanmar, met with the health minister and persuaded him that actually you guys need to train a children's eye specialist, what we call a paediatric ophthalmologist for your country. So he approved that, and we brought a young ophthalmologist out to Adelaide to train back in 2010 at the Women's and Children's Hospital here. And he returned home at the end of his hands-on year of training as the very first paediatric ophthalmologist for the country. And we then set him up in the country's first children's eye unit at the main teaching institution in the capital city, Yangon, where he works to this day. Again, obviously it's very disrupted at the moment. So that demonstrates the research, the education, and supporting that education with the equipment. And so what then happened as a result of training that one person, he now provides close to 30,000 treatments to children every single year.
Wow. Which
is astonishing in its own right, also almost difficult to comprehend. But what was even more important is that in 2015, he finished training the second paediatric ophthalmologist for his country using the expertise that he acquired here in Australia, and he now trains at least 2 every single year. So you can imagine, as he trains more of his colleagues and collectively they treat more children, that investment to train and equip him is so powerful, and that really demonstrates how our sustainable education model actually works. And if you multiply that, so we actually have in ophthalmology 10 subspecialty areas. We're also training, as site for all, in optometry as well. So if you realise that we've trained in all of our subspecialty areas across multiple countries and multiple poor countries in Asia, you can see how that then combines to have this multiplier effect, which is quite transformative. So it's been a really exciting thing to be involved in. People often ask me, what's it like to take the pad off a patient who's had, for example, a cataract removed and haven't, blind from cataracts? And that's a lovely experience, of course. But to see the impact of educating one person and the multiplier effect that can have is absolutely something that is beyond, it makes me so proud. In fact, that particular doctor, his name is Tan Tun Ong. I was in fact, after I won the award last year, I had to go back to Myanmar to finish filming a documentary about him, and we're just going into editing of that film at the moment to tell the story about the work of this young doctor, which is quite extraordinary. I've never been prouder of someone in my life, apart from my family, of course. It is just amazing to see what he's achieved. So I look forward to probably early next year releasing that documentary and telling that story.
And I think I love that, because what you're describing is this, that idea of you can give a man a fish or you can teach him how to fish, and giving people the tools to be able to not just change, what they're doing, but then teaching other people. It's that ripple effect, which is really the key, isn't it, to anything, any sort of sustainable, impactful project.
Absolutely, the sustainability is so important, the impact is important, and the comprehensive nature of what we do is important. As I said, we actually train in all of the various subspecialty areas of our profession. And I mentioned the fourth key strategy is raising awareness. So once you actually have, let's say, a children's eye specialist in a country where there wasn't one before, who's well equipped and is doing high quality surgery and diagnosis and treatment, you can then raise awareness in the population about the various or the major blinding diseases that afflict children. And then that will drive patients to that centre to seek treatment. So that really, I think, is a great example. And actually, if we look at the situation in Australia, I mentioned we also have projects in Aboriginal and mainstream communities. Now, unlike the situation in poorer or low-income countries, we don't call them developing countries anymore, low-income countries such as Myanmar, where often there is maybe not even an eye surgeon, certainly not an optometrist, but even if there is an eye surgeon, they may not be fully equipped. But then again, the healthcare is not free. So you have an accessibility and an affordability problem. Here in Australia, healthcare is free for all through our Medicare system, and you have eye surgeons and optometrists travelling to even the most remote parts of this country. So affordability and accessibility are not a problem here. The real problem is awareness. And so the majority of what we've been doing here in Australia is to raise awareness, and particularly the major blinding diseases that afflict our communities. And the big one, certainly in working age adults, is blindness due to diabetes. It's now the leading cause of blindness amongst working age adults. And why is it such a blinding problem? Well, one, because the major cause of diabetes is type 2 diabetes. That makes up about 90% of cases, and that's a growing epidemic that's grown fourfold over the last 40 years or so. So that is on the rise. But also, if we look at let's say the 1.7 million people in this country who have type 2 diabetes, well over half are not having their regular all-important sight-saving eye checks, and that's why it's become such a blinding problem. So we've been, leading up to my award, South Australian Award, even when I made my speech, I wanted to raise awareness of this critical fact and encourage people to have their eyes checked.
Absolutely. And I think it's a tricky thing, isn't it? People will often talk about having a touch of diabetes. I've just got a touch of diabetes. It's not a big problem. I'm not on pills or anything like that. So this minimalising really of the seriousness of the disease, and the idea that actually you can have damage to your eyes even before your diagnosis of diabetes. I know in our GP training we're encouraged, or the guidelines suggest that as soon as somebody's diagnosed, that the first thing they should do is have their eyes checked. But yeah, it's this idea that diabetes is not such a big deal when it is.
It is the single biggest deal in terms of our health. In fact, our poor diet is responsible for more disease and death than smoking, alcohol and inactivity combined. So it is the huge driver of our poor health. And that's when we talk about diabetes, let's say we're going to restrict our conversation to type 2 diabetes. Type 1 diabetes is a disease that generally afflicts younger people, and it's due to an autoimmune destruction of the pancreas. So the pancreas can then no longer secrete insulin, which is the critical hormone to deal with high sugar in the blood. So yeah, we're going to talk about type 2 diabetes. And type 2 diabetes, once your blood sugar reaches a certain point, then the diagnosis is made. Before that, we have a condition called prediabetes, and there's about 2 million Australians with prediabetes. But before that, we have a condition called insulin resistance, which is the big driver of this whole metabolic dysfunction. So even before we're diagnosed with prediabetes, if we have high insulin in the blood, then that in itself is causing damage.
Yes.
Which people don't realise. So this is a critical point. This is a continuum, but medicine loves to have boundaries and boxes, and yet there's damage almost certainly happening well before we're even diagnosed with prediabetes. And what's really concerning, Lucy, is that we are now seeing type 2 diabetes in children as young as 3, certainly in this country as young as 7. But there's a famous case from the UK of a 3-year-old with type 2 diabetes. There are cases of loss of vision due to what we call diabetic retinopathy or diabetes-related eye disease in children. It's pretty rare, fortunately, but there's no doubt the damage does begin in childhood.
Absolutely. And there was this slightly controversial ad that was pulled, I think. It was by a well-known optometry chain. And they were asking people, how much will you sell your eyes to me for? And, people are like, they're going, I want to buy your eyes. How much are they? And people are going, what? Don't be ridiculous. And, so people are being offered $1 million and they're going, no. And the idea was that your sight is priceless, but we take it for granted until it's too late. So I love the idea that we do need to raise awareness that blindness from type 2 diabetes and to a larger extent type 1 diabetes is preventable, but we have to make some steps. So what sort of things do you advise your patients on to, minimise the effect of type 2 diabetes?
Well, you know what? Until I received the award, I only ever saw myself as that doctor at the end stage treating the potentially blinding complications of diabetes, again, type 2 diabetes or even type 1, so I have a lot of type 1 patients that I'm treating as well. So that was my role. I was the guy that was hopefully preventing people from going blind due to their diabetes. Well, the good news is that 98% of the loss of vision and blindness due to diabetes is avoidable. So that's actually good. But if we don't even look at the opportunity to prevent or reverse type 2 diabetes, if someone has type 2 diabetes, 98% is preventable or treatable. But they have to come in for regular eye checks. As you say, as soon as they're diagnosed, because we don't know how long they had the diabetes before they were actually diagnosed, so they should come in, and we often see diabetic retinopathy at diagnosis. If it's not vision threatening, we might watch the patient, let's say, every 12 months. If they don't have disease, we might watch them every 2 years. But if they do have vision threatening disease, they may need treatment or they may need more close follow-up. So it is critical to be watching these patients like a hawk, really.
Yeah. Yes. So I guess, yes, emphasising the need for both doctors to remind their patients, but the patients also to make sure that they do go and have their regular checks. So do they need to see an optometrist or an ophthalmologist for their regular checks?
Well, generally what I say to patients, if a patient gets referred to me, let's say from a GP, and we can receive referrals from GPs or optometrists, if they're a newly diagnosed patient with diabetes, referred to James, no retinopathy, I will, and let's say if they do have an optometrist, I'll just recommend that they see their optometrist every year or two as they normally do. If they do have retinopathy, I'll generally hang on to them because, optometrists, as wonderful as they are, an incredible resource in the community, they don't see that many patients with active retinopathy. So it worries me that ultimately if they have anything more than very early, what we call background diabetic retinopathy or early retinopathy, then an ophthalmologist should be watching them. And so optometrists certainly can screen the vast majority of patients with diabetes. I think that's really important because it means that the health professional who has the experience and the skills to actually provide the treatment, we are focused on that rather than just screening patients who don't have eye disease. So if we then look at type 2 diabetes being preventable, or largely preventable, let's say, then we shouldn't even be seeing retinopathy, loss of vision, even blindness due to this condition. So I mentioned that until really when I received the award, and I started to think about it differently in late 2018. And I have been seeing this growth of my numbers of patients with type 2 diabetes simply because it's just becoming, it is growing in society. But in 2018, I was filming this documentary. I had 10 patients that I was exploring the experience of being blind. I had 4 children who were born blind, 4 at the end of their life who were gradually going blind to a condition called age-related macular degeneration, which is a leading cause of blindness in older Australians. But I had 2 patients who suddenly went blind due to their diabetes. And one particular patient, a guy called Neil Hansel, who actually went to bed one night at the age of 50 with normal sight and woke up the next morning blind in both eyes. And when I interviewed him, and the interview went for about an hour and a half, by the end of the interview, I was in tears. The cameraman was in tears. The sound engineer was in tears. He was in tears. It was absolutely heart-wrenching to hear that story of waking up, and the last thing he'd seen was his wife's face the night before. And he's still blind to this day. And so his name's Neil Hansel. He actually came onto the stage when I received the award. And it's such a powerful story. I've now made 2 TV commercials which features him, one that screened in late 2018 where he tells that story, and also one that's literally just been released this week, which hopefully we'll see on Channel 7, and it really shows the impact on Neil's family, his loss of vision. It's a very powerful 30-second TV commercial. So when I met him, I really started to sit up and think, okay, we really need to encourage people to have their eyes checked. But then when I received the South Australian Award going forward to the National Award, I thought, if I do receive this, not expecting to, but if I do receive it, as Australian of the Year, and I'm a doctor, what's our biggest health crisis at the moment? It's type 2 diabetes, quite simply. Should I not be raising awareness about type 2 diabetes, and particularly the root cause, which is our poor diet, a diet that's high in sugary drinks and ultra-processed foods. Shouldn't it be what I do? And I really agonised over this because it immediately puts you into a controversial space, and certainly literally from the minute I received the award, I had people come out to tear me down. The trolling started immediately, and it was a challenging and somewhat stressful space to be in. And even when I handed over the award in January this year to Grace Tame, do I want to keep on subjecting myself and my family to this stress? But no, I felt it's such an important thing, and so I've continued in my let's say battle even to raise awareness and to hold industry businesses, even our government, to account, and to really challenge this whole scenario. So it's been a fascinating journey. Type 2 diabetes, as I say, is largely preventable, and yet most people probably aren't aware of this. As you mentioned, the damage can start before people even developed diabetes. The vast majority of people wouldn't be aware of this. I suspect many doctors wouldn't be aware of this either. But also, when a patient does develop type 2 diabetes, that is potentially reversible, or you might like to say, we could put type 2 diabetes into remission. And what I discovered through my year was that there were so many barriers to both the prevention and the reversal of type 2 diabetes. It just beggars belief.
Yes, it is. I think, as you mentioned, vested interest groups, they're silencing, which sounds like a conspiracy, and I'm not a conspiracy theorist generally, but I have seen the effects of industry and the way that they have weaseled their way in to influencing lots of things, whether it's our Australian dietary guidelines, whether it's the medications and the education of GPs and other doctors around type 2 diabetes, and the idea that people who follow a low-carb lifestyle are somehow weirdos, fringe dwellers. And, I can understand where your blocks have come.
Mm-hmm.
And I was wondering too whether when after you became Australian of the Year, was the government thinking, oh, Jesus, now what have we done? It's a can of worms here. Because you're right. It's hard. I do often say to people, I don't think that we will get a tax on sugar anytime soon, because the sugar industry is huge in Australia, huge in Queensland, and is very influential in both sides of politics. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, when I received the award, I talked about a multi-pronged strategy to dealing with this problem, and one component of which was a tax on sugary drinks. And yet, because it was in Canberra and all the journalists who were at the award ceremony were political journos, tax on sugary drink was the one thing that they focused on. So in the newspapers, it was all about Dr. Muecke calls for a tax on sugar. But that's just one component, and that alone is not going to scratch the problem and not going to touch the problem. This is a multi-pronged strategy, which basically, you may have heard me talking about the 5 A's of sugar toxicity.
Yes,
and
I love that. Yeah, if you could do that again, that would be awesome.
I'll briefly mention that because that was a concept I came up with in January before I received the award, thinking, okay, I've got to have a strategy in mind, and how am I going to think about this? So I came up with these 5 A's of sugar toxicity. 1, addiction. Sugar is highly addictive, as addictive as nicotine. 2, alleviation. We often use sugar to alleviate stress or to make us feel better when we're down. 3, accessibility. Our world is quite literally flooded with outlets and sugary products. 4, addition. Something like 75% of our food and drinks have added sugar. And 5, advertising. We are bombarded quite literally by ads and TV commercials for sugary products. And once you're aware, it's quite extraordinary how often you see it.
I know.
So initially I came up with a strategy, okay, well, if we're going to have these 5 A's, then we can actually look at strategies to deal with those 5 A's of sugar toxicity. But then as the year progressed, it became more complicated and with different layers. And so I came up with this overarching A, which is action, and particularly action needed by our government. And then the 3 major A's that fall under that, which is, I mentioned before, raising awareness, holding businesses and industry to account, so accountability, and assistance. And there's a critical need for assistance here. I mentioned that, and you mentioned as well, that GPs have guidelines for prescribing medications for type 2 diabetes, but there's virtually nothing about dietary interventions, and particularly reducing carbs. This is a disease of carbohydrate intolerance, so quite literally reducing carbs is the key here. Yet there's so little about that. So if we look at these three overarching A's, and if we look at awareness first, awareness of the preventability and reversibility of type 2, awareness of the complications of type 2. I mentioned Neil Hansel, he was diagnosed with type 2 at the age of 26, had no idea of what was awaiting him. He's blind in both eyes. He's had 9 amputations over a 14-month period. He's had 2 heart attacks. He had no idea. And I suspect many patients who develop type 2 don't know what's awaiting them. So those things are critical to be aware of. And also awareness of this low-fat, high-carb dietary recommendations, which form the basis of our Australian dietary guidelines, is flawed. It's outdated, and it's based on biased, industry-influenced data. So this is critical, and this needs to be changed in our dietary guidelines. The Dietary Guideline Review Committee has just been appointed. I applied to be on it, unfortunately missed out.
I know, we were all sad about that, that's for sure.
I suspect because I've been calling out the dietary guidelines for the last year or so. So, missed out on that. But it's critical that is changed, that it's no longer demonising particularly natural saturated fats, that it's no longer encouraging us to eat seed oils or consume seed oils, and no longer encouraging us to continue to consume gallons of grains and cereals. So it really needs to be flipped on its head, its whole food pyramid. And the dietary guidelines are actually really powerful. They inform what's eaten in schools, in childcare, all the way through to aged care facilities. Also informs what's consumed in boarding houses, in the armed services, in prisons, in hospitals. And we often see patients who have had their legs amputated for gangrene due to type 2 with a breakfast of cereal, of orange juice, of white bread toast, of, it's just biggest belief again.
Yeah, with margarine and, low-cal jam.
All the harmful things, I know. And so an awareness of that is really important. But also the dietary guidelines inform health educators such as GPs, dietitians, nutritionists. It also informs health policy makers. And it also informs the food industry. And we know on the back of that demonisation of natural saturated fats, such as found in butter, full cream, dairy, unprocessed red meat, we saw this explosion of low-fat products. So it's really powerful. And so this absolutely needs change. So awareness, you can see, is so critical. And what I was hoping by the end of my year last year is that I was really working hard to have an awareness campaign out there on mainstream free-to-air TV. But unfortunately that didn't happen, and still to this day I have not seen anything from our government on free-to-air TV to raise awareness of these really critical issues and the really significant dangers of particularly sugar, refined carbohydrates and seed oils. Those are the big drivers, and those are the main components of ultra-processed foods, or what I prefer to call ultra-processed food-like substances.
Yes.
And we know that sugar has been linked to, there's over 8,000 studies now linking sugar to a whole range of chronic diseases, including type 2. And we know that the seed oils, and we know that ultra-processed foods have been linked to chronic diseases. So this is the big driver of our poor health. And if we look at the situation in the United States, 62% of the calories of a typical American diet is made up of ultra-processed foods. In the UK, it's 50%, and I suspect here in Australia it's much the same. So we just need to see awareness about the dangers of the diet that we're consuming, that many people think is okay, because that's what the dietary guidelines says. It's okay. And it's got a health star rating on it of 4 or 5 stars, that must be healthy. But if you realise also that the health star rating system is an industry device created by industry for industry, then you've got to be very wary of that rating. So that's just awareness, and we can go on and on about accountability and assistance, but quite literally, the obvious thing is, in terms of accountability, is checking out from the supermarket, checking out from chemists.
Yes.
There's some chains of chemists which are surrounded with junk food, and certainly at many supermarkets, it's often heavily discounted. and it's calling out to you, and I've been victim to it as well, but it's actually preying on people's addiction or physical dependency to sugar. It's preying on the vulnerable, and it's preying on our kids and their parents. And so those businesses and their industry allies need to be held accountable for this predatory sales and marketing behaviour that's going on. That's just one example of accountability.
Oh, totally. And the predatory marketing, it's stealth-like, and I often talk about this idea that there's drug dealers on every single corner, and it is, you can't even buy petrol without the dude at the petrol station saying, oh, do you want 2 of these things at 2 for 1 today? So this constant barrage in our mind of these products that are available.
Well, even the stamp, before you get into the petrol station, you're holding the nozzle into your car, filling it with petrol, and there's a 2 for 1 chocolate deal on the nozzle. It's called NOS ads, so it's a real thing. It's already starting to get your dopamine flowing before you've even got into the store. So when you do get into the store, there's the 2 for 1 chocolate. Bingo, I've got it. And then, once again, I've been victim to that. And rather than having 1 chocolate bar, you might have 2. And by the time I've got home, it's just around the corner. I've usually consumed both of them.
Yeah, well, I used to have this little saying that if I ate it in the car, I didn't really eat it. Like nobody, no one saw it, so therefore it didn't happen.
Exactly.
Yes, as you said, that sugar addiction is so intense, and here are people facilitating it for us. One of my techniques that I had to do, which I still do, is I now never go into the petrol station. I only go to petrol stations that have a pay at the pump option with either an app or some of them you can scan there. And that at least avoids one gauntlet that you have to run, because this subliminal messaging that goes into our brain all the time, it sets up these little neural pathways, the jingles, it's all part of it.
It's a very good point, actually. I might do that myself. The other thing I do is avoid those service stations and those supermarkets and stores that actually are particularly bad at that. I don't want to give them my business full stop. I think it's just disgusting and it needs to stop. So, yeah, it's that's a really good tactic. I might try that.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think spread it far and wide, because then, again, it's all about, these businesses work out what makes them money. And as you said, they don't care about our health.
Profits over health, yeah. But parents and grandparents need to be accountable as well. Sugary products are the only addictive things that we actually give to babies. So this thing starts, we're basically setting up our kids for a lifetime of metabolic dysfunction. And it actually even starts in pregnancy, because we know that when we consume sugary products, it crosses into the fetus, but insulin doesn't. So we're actually already priming them for a lifetime of potential chronic or even behavioural diseases before they're even born. So awareness needs to start very early during pregnancy, in the earliest years of school. Parents, grandparents need to be on board with it. Granny giving sugary treats is not what we should be doing. Schools need to be held accountable. They are actually using sugary products as fundraisers now. And what's sold in their tuck shops and canteens is diabolical. So, yeah, there's so many layers of this.
Absolutely. And you're right, yes.
And we haven't even talked about sugary tax. We haven't even talked about the tax. So you can see it's just one tiny little piece of the cog. But there is evidence and solid science behind that.
Yes. So, and I think it's hard because we're aware, so awareness is not a problem for, people like you and me, and it's still hard because of this just bombarding of messaging, and the idea too that when people take a bit of a stand and say, you know what, I'm not consuming that stuff anymore, sometimes even their friends will have a go at them and go, oh, you're so virtuous, you're so righteous, and it's really this, we call it sort of food shaming for people that eat well. So it's really helpful that there's a kind of a movement, if you like, so that people can feel supported in their quest to reduce sugar in their lives, because it isn't something that is easy, but it's ultimately very doable.
Yeah, exactly. It's a detox from sugar. Of course, everyone knows, or not everyone, but a lot of people know about my stance on particularly sugar and ultra-processed foods. But, I'm not fully detoxed from sugar. I still enjoy the occasional chocolate, the occasional ice cream. So I'm not being sort of virtuous and hardline about it. But everyone knows, we're at a dinner party on Saturday night, and or, someone brought out chocolates and, we shouldn't have brought out chocolates because James is here. So there is this normalisation of these products, and also normalisation now of, unfortunately, markers of metabolic health. What's extraordinary, and there are many examples of this, but one of the big drivers of this whole process is what we call a fatty liver, which is develops after we have insulin resistance. There are a number of radiologists, I understand, because I've actually heard from the horse's mouth, that don't even bother to report mild fatty liver because it's so common. It's almost seen as normal now. So, that's a real worry. That absolutely should be the first thing that's reported back to the GP, that this patient is metabolically unhealthy and they need to do something about it. And what's really important, and there's a lot of talk now about fat shaming, but if you realise that only 1 in 200 people who are obese are metabolically healthy, then they are setting themselves up for potential complications and a lifetime of misery and expense. But 2/3 of Australian adults over the age of 24 are overweight or obese, and about a quarter of our kids. So the majority of us are not metabolically healthy. But if you look at someone like me, I'm 6'4", I'm tall and thin, but I found out early last year that I had a fatty liver. So I'm tall and thin. And what's really important to be aware is that in the United States, and I suspect here in Australia and much of the world, there are now more thin metabolically unhealthy people than there are overweight or obese metabolically unhealthy people. So we should not be focusing on obesity. We should be focusing on what we're consuming, not the number of calories, but the type of calories, but particularly the fructose element of sugar, and particularly those seed oils and ultra-processed foods that I mentioned. So this is again, really important for people to be aware. You can be thin and actually be metabolically unhealthy.
Oh, absolutely. And I think that, and you can be, overweight and be metabolically healthy. So the number on the scales is not the only, and in fact often not the determinant of health. It is really, as you said, looking at your fatty, whether you have fatty liver, whether you have insulin resistance, what is your eye health like, how are your nerves, how are your little arteries in your toes, all of those sorts of things are much more indicative of your health than your actual number on the scales.
Exactly, and it's that what we call abdominal obesity or visceral obesity, which is one of the 5 key elements of metabolic syndrome, which is the driver of metabolic dysfunction. And particularly, what a great way, often people ask me, how do I know I'm not overweight or obese, but how do I know if I'm... Is there an indicator? Yes, there is. That little bit of belly fat can be a warning sign, and so you can actually measure your waist circumference, your girth, and if that's more than half of your height, then there's a high chance that you have abdominal or visceral obesity or a fatty liver or fatty pancreas. So I would be encouraging your GP to test your fasting insulin level, potentially even doing a liver ultrasound to see if you have the beginnings of metabolic dysfunction, which could be leading you down the pathway of type 2 diabetes and its complications, which are life-changing and life-threatening.
Absolutely. And I would love it if every GP did fasting insulin levels when we love checking cholesterol. We check that all the time. And we'll check blood glucose, but nobody checks insulin. And in fact, interestingly, some of the people who are doing our programs, we give them a list. We say, here's a letter, take this to your doctor. Here's a list of blood tests that you might like to consider. And the doctors will often go, I'm not going to bother with insulin because what am I going to do with it? It's really that downstream. It is, if we can fix the hyperinsulinemia early with a low carbohydrate lifestyle, you can prevent years and years and years of chronic disease in the future.
Absolutely. So the blood sugar doesn't start to rise until we have pancreatic damage. So the insulin resistance and the hyperinsulinemia, the high blood insulin, begins way before that. And it's actually the insulin which is the driver of weight gain. And it's the insulin which is also a big driver of the complications of type 2 diabetes, which, as we said, can often begin before the diagnosis has actually happened. So when you have the high insulin level combined with the high triglyceride level, which occurs once we develop a fatty liver, those two things are the big driver of the fatty plaque deposition in arteries, whether they're in the legs, the eyes, or the coronary arteries, causing heart attacks, in the brain, causing strokes. It's that which, once again, people need to be aware of, that insulin is actually the bad guy here. The high glucose is actually a symptom of the disease. The high insulin is the bad guy. Also, high blood sugar, persistent high blood sugar has damaging effects as well. So it's really the trifecta of high triglyceride, high insulin, and high glucose, which is so damaging. But if we can, as you say, quite simply, reducing the carbohydrates in our diet, immediately the insulin starts to drop, the blood sugar starts to drop, you can actually dissipate a fatty liver, you can actually reverse your metabolic dysfunction in as little as a month.
I know. That's like my favourite thing, and I'm sure yours too, where you have somebody and everything's all out of whack and their liver's not great, their triglycerides are high and, insulin's high and maybe their glucose is high. And then in just a short time, that can be reversed. And that's irrespective of weight loss. So some people get sort of worried that I've only lost a kilo. They'll come in, Lucy, I've only lost a kilo on this diet. I don't think it's working. And I go, no. Look what you've done. You've fixed your liver. Your liver, your lovely, lovely liver is better. And, you've done all of these things. And yes, the number on the scales, it will come. Don't use that as your only criteria of success.
Exactly. And the other thing which is really important as well, Lucy, is blood pressure. So insulin causes sodium retention, and that in turn, there are a number of other factors, but that in turn can lead to hypertension or high blood pressure. So insulin is a big driver of high blood pressure. In fact, probably 50% of hypertensive patients, insulin resistance is causative. And we know that high blood pressure is the biggest risk factor for death. And quite simply, reducing carbs and dropping that insulin level, people can reduce their blood pressure without actually needing to go onto medications. I mean, the unfortunate knee-jerk reaction when someone's got high blood pressure, put them on medications, not even exploring the underlying dietary cause. So reduce the carbs, reduce the blood pressure. It's a no-brainer.
It's a no-brainer.
It's just so simple. No-brainer. So it's a good word. It's so simple, and yet it's so poorly understood by, unfortunately, grassroots health practitioners.
Oh, yeah. And I think our health system is set up, sadly, for short, quick, rapid turnover consultations. They're rewarded financially. The faster you can see people, the more people you can see in that 1 hour, the more money the practice and the doctor will make. The long consultations, I do long consultations, and they're poorly remunerated compared to the short ones. But the savings to not just the patient who no longer has to take medications, the community that's not subsidising the medications, the reduction in medication side effects, it's enormous.
And it's incredibly satisfying, isn't it? I've had I think you asked me a question early on, which I don't think I answered, but I have now in the last 6 months, over 100 patients with type 2 diabetes with vision-threatening eye disease that I'm actively treating, and I've communicated back to their GP saying, can you please explore low carb or even a ketogenic diet with this patient. I've recommended a nutritionist that specialises in it. So I've actually directed them down a pathway to get this underway, because I can actually see its benefits in terms of the eye complications as well. And patients who are reversing their diabetes, we've had a number now who are saying, wow, they're seeing better, they feel $1 million. It's such a satisfying thing as a health practitioner, because I think the opposite, watching these patients on this downhill decline, must be one of the most frustrating and soul-destroying things as a frontline health practitioner. And you're right, and I mentioned my third key strategy of assistance. So my son was in second year medical school last year. He had the opportunity to do nutrition as an elective, so not even compulsory in most of our medical schools. Once you are a general practitioner and you're out there in the community, as you say, you don't have the resources, you haven't had the education, and you don't have the remuneration to be able to have these really critical discussions with patients. So many things need to change here.
Absolutely. And, Mary and I love, and I'm sure you do too, love saying that the phrase food is medicine. It's really interesting, though. It gets a bit of pushback from doctors. And in fact, I think there's some sort of T-shirt going around where it says food is medicine, and it's crossed out the food and says medicine is medicine. And I'm thinking, oh, my God, the number of people that you've seen, that I've seen, that actually reverse their chronic disease. So it's not just to prevent chronic disease, it's to treat chronic disease by changing what they eat, is amazing.
Exactly. It's the single most powerful thing we can do. Far more powerful, as I said before, than exercise. Changing diet has much more impact. Far eclipses exercise to improve those markers of metabolic health.
Absolutely. Now, do you know the one sort of little subgroup of industry that I would love to get my claws into? I don't think Coke are out there trying to market their drink as being healthy. I think nobody thinks Coke's healthy. But there is a group of processed food companies that are marketing their product as healthy when it's not. Mm-hmm. And there's no regulation on the word healthy. You can do whatever you like and decide that it's healthy and stick a star on it and mark healthy in there. What are your thoughts on this little subgroup?
Oh, and the terms organic and natural, it's manipulated and used to the advantage of the food industry. But if we just look at the health star rating system I mentioned before,
yes.
It's flawed. It's flawed because it's voluntary. That's one thing. Only 30% of manufacturers using it. Why would you put an unhealthy rating on something that you're trying to sell and promote? But it's also flawed because it gives healthy rating to a number of inherently unhealthy products which are packed with sugar, seed oils and refined carbohydrates. Now, if you realise that the algorithm for the health star rating system was designed by one of the executives of one of the major food companies here in Australia, you realise it's designed to actually give their food products a healthy rating. So it's you cannot trust this. And also we then look at those nutritional labels on the packets of foods. That they don't tell us how much added sugar is contained within, but we know that there are, I think, something like 260 odd different names for sugar. There's 56 common names for sugar which are commonly used on the packets of foods, and this only confuses the consumer more. So there's an accountability factor here. We absolutely need clear and transparent labelling system on the packets of ultra-processed foods, telling us exactly how much sugar is contained within, so that people know absolutely what's going on inside that packet they're about to consume. And the health star rating system needs a complete overhaul because it is absolutely biased in favour of industry. And even if you look at the literature that informs the dietary guidelines that we're all following, there are sections of it where the majority of the literature references or studies which are funded by the food industry. And we know when the food industry funds a study, it's nearly 8 times more likely to show a result in favour of that industry. So again, we need to actually remove the food industry, and particularly the ultra-processed food industry, influence on our dietary guidelines. It's so critical.
Absolutely. And, just thinking about the health star rating, I happened to... This week in my shopping, I got my normal, cream that I get, which I just buy the one. It comes in a little cardboard packet and it's just cream. There's nothing else in it. It's got 1 star. The olives that I got have got 2 stars. The cereal that's been sitting in my cupboard for about 2 years, it probably needs to get in the bin now, has got 4.5 stars. And part of it is that it's got added vitamins as well, which bump up the number. So you can have a totally rubbish product. You just add in fortified vitamins and it'll bump up your star rating like crazy.
Oh, it is madness, isn't it? And actually the added vitamins and added minerals are not as bioavailable as those vitamins and minerals in real food.
Yes.
So it's something that, again, people aren't aware of. They're thinking, this is fortified by iron and this is fortified by vitamin C or D or whatever it might be, that, this is a good thing. But actually, what we call bioavailability, the ability of the body to absorb those vitamin minerals, is often impaired and is not like consuming the real thing. So as we often say, why not just eat real food? Why eat this ultra-processed packaged rubbish, which is unhealthy?
Yes, I think we're in agreement. James, it has been wonderful to talk to you. And I'm so thrilled that you were able to use your platform to advocate for people. And I understand that, COVID put a dampener on the the speaking engagements and all of those things. But I think what's happening is, though, that instead of it being like a short, sharp thing, it's like this festival. The Festival of James is going to go on for years. And the idea that we are just raising ongoing awareness for people to, eat real food. And the thing is, if you're insulin resistant, which, a huge proportion of Australians now are, and if you're in that 50 to 60-year-old age group, it's 80% of Australians are insulin resistant in that age group. So if you're insulin resistant, you eat low carb, real food.
Yeah.
Simple.
It's a no-brainer. Yeah,
no
just
brainer.
do it. No-brainer. Yeah. No, it's true. And I'll continue to keep on pushing. And I think the one thing that I feel quite proud of is that we now have remission of type 2 diabetes in the National Diabetes Strategy for the first time. That's going to be released reasonably soon. So I think that that's going to give general practitioners and dietitians and health practitioners the comfort, nutritionists, the comfort to actually have these conversations with patients. And we now, as a result of my lobbying, we now have Diabetes Australia in their type 2 diabetes page. There now is talk about remission. There is now, they've softened their wording that type 2 diabetes is a progressive disease. So we're having change. It's slowly, but as you say, this is something that's not going to happen in a hurry. But I think we're at the beginning of a transformation, which hopefully will ultimately have impact to the entire country, the entire world, really.
Absolutely. Could you just remind our listeners of your not-for-profit organisation, because I'm sure they'll want to go and look it up, and if you've got a website, we would love to know what it is.
Yes, Sight for All, so FOR rather than number 4, and the website is sightforall.org, and there we have a number of, we have a Facebook, Instagram account, a YouTube for Sight for All, but also my work as Australian of the Year. I've kind of stepped aside to a little degree from Sight for All. I'm still very much involved with Sight for All, but my messaging around type 2 diabetes is kind of using the platform of Australian of the Year to raise awareness. So I have my own social media hashtags, which on Instagram, YouTube, Facebook, and LinkedIn. So people can just, I suppose, search Dr. James Muecke and you should find me.
Yes, and Muecke is spelled?
Muecke, Muecke.
There we go. All right, lovely listeners, hasn't that been fun? We have had the most wonderful time. Thank you once again, James, for taking time out of your very, very busy schedule. I think that you're now off to welcoming the new governor, is that right?
That's right, yeah, looking forward to that.
Excellent. Wonderful, wonderful. All right, lovely listeners, I will be back next week with Dr. Mary, and I will see you. Oh, I won't see you. You will hear me. Then have a wonderful, wonderful week. Lovely, it's Dr. Lucy here. Just wanted to let you know about a live masterclass that we are running on November the 23rd called Thriving Through Christmas. We know that for many of you, this silly season can feel a bit daunting, and we've got some great strategies and tips to help you thrive through Christmas. So if you'd like to join us, you can go to our website, rlmedicine.com/thrive and register, and we'll see you on the 23rd. Bye for now. So, my lovely listeners, that ends this episode of Real Health and Weight Loss. I'm Dr. Lucy Burns.
And I'm Dr. Mary Barson. We're from Real Life Medicine. To contact us, please visit rlmedicine.com.
And until next time, thanks for listening.